With terror threats on the rise, new worries about the U.S. selling military equipment to countries with suspected ties to terror groups. Now, one of these nations, Qatar, getting $11 billion worth of arms last year alone. And as the president powwowed with Qatar's leader this week, some lawmakers sending a letter to the administration asking it to reassess those military sales. So should we just cut off all sales to all countries who have ties to terrorists? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Mike Ozanian, Elizabeth McDonald, Kerry Sheffield, Bill Baldwin, and John Tamny. Mike Ozanian, why are we arming folks who help terrorists?
Because, David, President Obama has been downplaying the threat that ISIS poses to America, going all the way back to the attack on the American consulate in Benghazi. That's why he's arming Qatar, even though Qatar is definitely helping the terrorists in the Middle East. John Bolton's been warning about this for months now, and Egypt, our ally there in going after ISIS, has been warning us about that. But the administration has totally ignored those warnings.
We don't have to sell them arms, Bill. Why are we doing it?
Well, I think you have to shed some of your idealism when you engage in foreign affairs. Because if you're too picky about your alliances, you wind up fighting alone. Imagine if in the Second World War we had said we're going to refuse to help the Soviets defeat the Germans because we're unhappy with Stalin's human rights record. It's just the way the world works.
But EMAC, we made a deal with the Soviets in World War II because we wanted to defeat Nazism. ISIS is as close to the Nazis as you can possibly get now. Why do we deal with any country that gives them help?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, you're right. Here's the issue. It's really hard to do the carrot and stick approach of foreign aid and foreign policy when you're dealing with a region rife with religious fanaticism. And one thing that's been suggested, I think it's a good idea. I get it. I understand you want to curry favor and have some interest in the region to basically attack your enemies there. But what about moving the military base, the airport there that the military uses in Qatar, move it to Kuwait, Jordan, or Bahrain? That's been suggested.
All right. Well, Steve, let's be specific here. Qatar supports Hamas. We designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. There's a lot of evidence that they helped provide the seed money for ISIS, and there's still some supporters in Qatar for that organization. So why do we deal with them at all?
Well, we deal with them because in that part of the world, you have to ask yourself, do we gain more than we lose? And behind the scenes, we should be putting effective pressure on them. But don't forget, David, if we don't sell them the arms, the Russians, the Chinese, the Swedes, and the French will. We need every ally we can get. You take Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is going to help Israel, and Israel finally strikes Iran. So you have to ask yourself, do we gain a little more than we lose? And that's an ongoing thing. Sadly, in that part of the world, it's not up and down, just as it was not up and down clear in the Cold War.
No, but John,
we had to work with people we didn't like to work with.
Sometimes our relation with Qatar is just too damn cozy. I mean, I think of the contributions it made to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. That's not right, is it?
Well, you know, Steve is right. The question of arms sales is kind of a distraction here. If we're not selling to them, other arms dealers or other countries will. I guess my question is why, you're right, why the close relationship with Qatar? The federal government is required to fend for our national defense. I keep wanting the question answered. How is our national defense enhanced by these involvements overseas, particularly in the Middle East? I think it's at least debatable that maybe we're less safe.
Kerry, what do you think?
I disagree. You know, I've spent some time in Doha with Qatar University. This country is fundamentally oriented to the West. We have huge campuses like Georgetown, Cornell, Texas A&M. They all have presence in Qatar. This is a failure by the White House. The Pentagon wants to keep the Air Force Base there. It's the White House that is failing to step up and be with our allies in the same way they've been with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So I see it as a failure by Obama, not by Qatar so much.
Well, Mike Ozanian, with all deference to our friend Kerry, I do think back to the times before World War II when everybody was saying, oh, the Japanese, they dress like us, they talk like us, they appreciate our literature, etc., when in fact they turned out to be brutes on the battlefield. I mean, you know, again, you got to beware of the superficial view of somebody rather than what their essence is.
So it comes back to what type of return are you getting? And I don't think we've gotten our money's worth from Qatar. I think Qatar's been too cozy with the terrorists there. And particularly, let's not forget, terrorists that also also want to harm Israel. And I think Netanyahu is really the one adult in the room here. And I think this is the person that we got to listen to in terms of national leaders right now. Unfortunately, not President Obama.
And Steve, by the way, hold on a second, Steve, the only organization or nationality that's really willing to go all in and fight ISIS are the Kurds. The Kurds are not getting the weapons they need from us. Here we're giving all this weaponry to Turkey, for example. I think Turkey got about $6 billion worth of our weapons, and yet we're not giving weapons or even selling weapons to the Kurds that they need to really fight ISIS.
Well, that's a different question, aside from Qatar. We should obviously be arming the Kurds, and talk about Europe, another part of the world. We should be arming the Ukrainians with defensive weapons against Putin's aggression. But in the case of Qatar, one reason why they're trying to play both sides of the fence on this is they're wondering whether the U.S. is going to be a steadfast ally. And in terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel, they are working behind the scenes with the Saudis, who also have been doing some things from time to time that we don't like. But again, there's more help. 51% versus 49%. In that part of the world, that's the kind of question you have to ask.
And Emak, frankly, the Turks seem to be less close as an ally against ISIS than the Kurds do. I mean, the Turks, there's a lot of evidence that the Turks had too cozy relationship various times with ISIS.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote from Henry Kissinger about the president. He has all these chess moves out, but doesn't know how to finish the game, right? So, you know, here's the thing. We have to be specific on what Qatar is doing. It is a safe haven for terrorists. It's not just ISIS. Right. It's Hamas. It's the Taliban. It's all sorts of terrorist groups throughout the region. So it is straddling the fence here. It is playing both sides of the aisle. I think we can put pressure on it. I think Mike Ozena is right. It's about what is effective and what do we get in the United States for our investment
Carrie has
there.
been dying again. And Carrie, you cannot straddle the fence when it comes to ISIS, can you?
Hey, everybody, you know what? It's so easy. We're across on this side of the Atlantic. Qatar is in a dangerous neighborhood. They helped dispose Gaddafi. They helped broker peace between Hamas
look at how
and
Libya's
Israel.
turned out,
They've
Carrie.
helped fight against Assad, whereas our president is a coward and won't go fight against Assad. So I trust, in some ways, what Qatar is doing, and I agree with Steve that we have not been a reliable ally to Qatar.
John Tamny, frankly, I don't trust Qatar that much at all in their dealings in the Mideast. I know it's dangerous territory. They're just a short boat ride away from Iran. They've got their own troubles. I agree with that. I get it. But the fact is, I don't trust people that deal with these terror groups.
Absolutely, but even if they are more on our side, I keep hearing stuff about reliable ally, and wait a second, we are talking about the U.S.'s national defense, and I don't think, as it's asked often enough, how does all this activity over there help our national defense? How does it make us more safe? I think it's at least a debate we've got to have. Are we safer because of what we're doing over there?
Steve?
Well, that's going to be another segment at another time. But the fact of the matter is those forces in the Middle East are ultimately after the United States, Europe, and Israel. If you don't get them now, they're going to come after us later. We should have learned that from the 30s. We should have learned it again from the 1970s. When we're weak, we get in trouble and the world gets in trouble.
Bill Baldwin, go ahead.
You just can't be too fussy. Are we going to refuse to buy Saudi oil because some Saudis were part of 9/11? You just can't be fussy in a part of the world where nobody's
Well,
pure.
hold on a second. Emak, I think the fact is that you can't be fussy if you have strong leadership at home. When FDR was in power, nobody doubted his resolve to fight the Nazis once he got into World War II. We now have a president who doesn't have that same kind of resolve. Reagan had the resolve in fighting the Soviets. FDR did in fighting the Nazis. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we do in fighting ISIS.
And you're right. And Bill brought up oil. The president should act with all the strength and resolve he has because of the U.S. oil boom. We don't need Mideast oil right now, so we should be advancing our interests in the area just on the respect alone. All
right. That's the last word. Well, you think dealing with your cable company is frustrating now? Just wait until Washington's new massive internet regulations kick in. Some here say get ready for higher prices than this.